Jeffrey Sire, CEO, Raven Indigenous Impact Foundation. And our moderator for this morning, Hala Hanna, Managing Director, MIT Solve.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you. Welcome to day 2 of Solve at MIT. Yay. You know, we do want Omolara's story to be the rule and not the exception. And this is some of the things that we're going to be talking about right now. For centuries in this country, Black, Indigenous, and people of color have demonstrated resilience and ingenuity in the face of entrenched injustice and inequity. And I'll be using the acronym BIPOC with an asterisk next to it for all of the nuances and cultures and identities that it may not capture necessarily. But we've just passed the 700-day mark since George Floyd's death, and there's been calls and commitments to do more, to close the race gap in outcomes, and to increase racial equity. At Solve 2, we've increased our attention and resources at home. We wanted to build on our Indigenous Communities Fellowship, which we started in 2017 after an invitation from the women tribal leaders of the Dakota Access Pipeline. So we've launched and we continue to launch US-focused challenges to find and support the most promising Black and Brown and Indigenous innovators with partners and people like Angela and Lynette from the Truist Foundation, whom you'll hear from later. And this year, we've added Black and Brown innovators in the US program to our global work to keep this focus. So just to give you a sense of what Solve is doing in the area, but obviously there's so much more that we all have to do for the gaps to start closing faster. So in the next hour, we want to celebrate innovators like Omolara and like David, the artist that you're going to see after this panel, and with our speakers, explore what more we can do to build that equitable, anti-racist future powered by technology that we all deserve. For our first panel, we are going to focus on closing the gap in investing in communities of color. And Angela and Jeff, you've both been advocates for decades for disenfranchised communities, and you have in recent years set up funds. Jeff, Raven invests in Indigenous communities in Canada, and Angela with Kapor, which invests in underrepresented communities writ large. So I really wanted to start with a pulse check on the state of investing in under-resourced innovators. Are we seeing more capital flowing? Is this, increase in attention just a moment, or is this really a movement? Do you feel like this is going to be something that sustains? Angela, we can start with you.
So the way that I'm thinking about it now, after the death of George Floyd and the protest, there were $200 billion that were committed towards racial equity. When I looked at the last report from McKinsey, less than 20% of those dollars had actually been deployed. So there's lots of commitments. What we're seeing is a slowing to actually deploying those funds. And so we really need to think about that. And if you're taking a step back, a lot of the people who are deploying the funds are these corporations, and they've been really opaque about how they're actually doing this work. And so you'll see those commitments have been over multi-years, 3 years. It's really hard to track them. So the thing that I'm thinking about and what gives me hope in this moment is that we have citizen journalism. So there's people like Judd Apatow, who's actually from Popular Information. There's Sherelle Dorsey, who has a media called The Plug, and she's reporting on Black innovation. It's really important that we keep these commitments to the forefront and that we hold corporations accountable for these commitments. And also, when I say accountable, that we're asking them to be transparent about these commitments. So what happened? What did they deploy in 2021? What was deployed in 2022? How many dollars are left? And I will say, I'm going to give a shout out to JPMorgan Chase, because they're actually doing that. You can go on their website and they tell you how much that they've deployed towards their commitment. And what we need is from all corporations to have that same type of transparency.
Thank you for that. And Jeff, we were just talking backstage about your experience with Indigenous communities in Canada and raising multiple funds right now.
Yeah, so first of all, my apologies, I sound a bit like a jazz singer this morning. I should introduce myself in a traditional way. Tanshi, Kinu Kirine, Indigenous. My name is, my English name is Jeff Sear. So we run Raven Indigenous Capital Partners and the Raven Foundation, and about 4 years ago now, we set up the first Indigenous Impact Investing Fund, and I can tell you it was an uphill battle. We were definitely pushing a boulder uphill with institutional and high net worth family offices. The systemic racism was definitely there because there were no Indigenous venture capital investors or fund managers such as ourselves out there. And then, you know, sort of a year and a half through that process of raising capital, I mean, we had some pretty brutal meetings, to be honest. I mean, if I didn't come from MIT, Harvard, or Stanford, they didn't really want to talk to me. Eventually, we broke through the ceiling, though, and I think partially it goes to what was going on globally. In Canada, we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which kind of brought to public attention what had been going on with Indigenous people since colonization. And we also had the Black Lives Matter movement, the D&I movement really broadly happening across North America, and we invest in Canada and the United States. And so somewhere around, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, we saw a pivot where big institutional investors and capital was seeking a home for sure. And they were seeking a high social impact home where they could invest either directly or through fund managers into high impact businesses. Really putting social impact, if I can use those terms broadly, at the forefront of what they wanted to see out of it, and not really commercial returns. That is a pivot, a definite pivot going on in the ecosystem. You know, and to close off that sort of comment is we're raising Fund 2 now, which is a $100 million fund, and it is about 100 times easier than Fund 1. A, we have a track record, so that's easier. But B, institutional capital, we actually have to close our data room. There are too many people interested. And where we really invest is the Indigenous innovation ecosystem. So you can tell where people are going. Last comment, I know I'm taking too much time, is that thankfully what we're seeing out of our communities in Canada, the United States, across Turtle Island, is a huge amount of innovation coming from community. Tech-enabled, e-commerce businesses, that sort of thing. So.
And there's just a point I want to clarify, and I think, Jeff, you're right. There's a lot being deployed because of impact, and I'm with Kapor Center. We invest with an impact lens, but we also want returns. We don't want the narrative to be, when you're investing in Black, Latinx, or Indigenous communities, that you're expecting concessionary returns. In those communities, there's the same genius, right? And they're solving problems for their communities. So our ethos is, yes, we're going to get impact, but also we can expect returns. And so what I'd like to see investors think about is like beyond we're doing this because it's the moral thing to do or the charitable thing to do, really doing it in service of equity and in service of like efficiency. If you want a better return on your investment. Kapor Capital, which is our early seed stage fund, for the last 6 years, we've been in the top quartile of funds. And we're investing in both with that impact, but also looking for those market returns.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit onto that is, we don't want charitable investing at all. That's not what we want. The businesses that we invest in, we see as best in class businesses, not best in Indigenous, best in class across the stream. So if someone wants to do it as a charitable thing, it's not really helpful to our communities to do that. We prefer businesses who are interested in, you know, having that due diligence. These are, you know, game-changing businesses on their own right, just to back up your point. Yeah.
And maybe we can spend the next few moments actually unpacking what we mean by impact, what are the values behind it, what we mean by returns, you know, why are those folks actually best placed to bring those returns. And I'd love to anchor some of this conversation with the concept of proximity and proximate entrepreneurs, which I think, Angela, you've coined and we've adopted at Solve as one of the criteria that we look for. So I'd love to for you to talk a little bit about that and how it links to actually making good investments.
Absolutely. So, you know, proximate entrepreneurs, and I've written a bit about this in Social Stanford Innovation Review, but really thinking about expertise, and proximity is expertise. And so when we're looking at entrepreneurs, we want to understand when they're coming to us to invest in a solution, how that they've discovered this problem. Have they lived the problem that they're trying to solve? Do they have hard-won professional experience with the problem that they're trying to solve? And what we've seen is that those entrepreneurs actually have a nuanced understanding on, one, why the problem hasn't been solved in the past, and two, what tweaks can be made so that it's more effective. And so just to give an example of that, there is one organization out there that I've written about called Girl Trek. Two African American women who created this organization to get black women moving. And what was so interesting about this idea is that many entrepreneurs and many nonprofits had approached obesity in the black community with something as, people just need to go on a diet. They just need to eat better. What they realize is that black women in community, that they really care about each other and they care about community. So when you bring them together around issues that are really important around health and having a conversation, what they can do is they will start a movement. And so what Girl Trek did is they have over 1 million black women walking in their neighborhoods. And what has happened as a consequence of that is that, one, you've got, health outcomes are improving, but two, when you get women together and we start seeing things in our neighborhood, they start fixing things. So when they are walking down their streets and they see a pothole or they see a house that has been abandoned and has been abandoned for years, these women have come together to improve things in their community. So you see the double benefit. And they didn't approach it from, problem-size, these black women is just about their weight. It's really taken into account the other barriers that black women are facing, being disproportionately independent parents, having longer commutes, really understanding the problem from a systems way and coming up with a solution that not only helps these black women and their health, but also that helps their communities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So proximity as a value. The values that are behind Raven Capital, I find also extremely compelling and not traditional. I would love if you could talk a little bit about them, Jeff.
Sure. So we sort of imbibe the 7 sacred or 7 grandfather teachings, depending on where you come from. A lot of it has to do with respect and reciprocity and honor. And when we get into what we look for investments and get into, what you'll hear from us is we're not investing in you, we're becoming into a relationship with you. And we only take minority positions in companies. We always take seats on the board, and then we're there to help grow value in these businesses, but grow value in the way that those businesses want to with their community. Now, the first thing that we screen for is Indigenous impact. We don't screen for commercial due diligence first, we screen for Indigenous impact. We don't even want to talk to you if we can't see a direct line of sight between every dollar that we put in and the upliftment of our communities. And we have sort of fairly complicated measures to get to that. We're in a position where we think, we're trying to undo colonization and trying to undo, the way that Western economies work, because it's not helping the vast majority of people. Fewer getting richer, more getting poorer. We all know these stories. So we're trying to actually treat, and you'll probably find this term a little bit weird, we want money to act as medicine and love and not extraction, which it tends to do. So that's weird coming from a venture capitalist, I know, but we want to keep money, keep resources and what we call wealth, but that's human wealth, inside communities. We don't want to extract it like traditional venture capital tries to extract the wealth. 2 become unicorns, 18 fail. That's not us. We want the tide to lift all boats. So we're okay to give up some of those returns. How much money do we really all need at the end of the day? And have everyone uplift by it. So it's a complicated investment strategy, but it's super rewarding, both as an investor, for our investors who invest in us. I mean, we even created an Indigenous Impact Metrics Framework, which tracks to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in each portfolio company, so we can see where success is against the broader goals of Indigenous people globally. So it's a different value system. Sometimes, people on Wall Street or Bay Street in Canada kind of pat us on the head, say, that's nice, we'll get those returns, but we're okay with that. That's not what we're here to do, so.
I would say that value is so important too, because Kapor, we're very similar into having that commitment. And we have anyone that we invest in take a founder's commitment, because we understand us requiring that or asking that is not enough in itself. We are really trying to have systems change. So we also want to invest in founders who are willing to make that commitment within their own organizations, right? Prioritizing expertise of the community, actually being in community with those communities, which is real critical importance. And, venture capital doesn't work for many people. And one thing that we're doing at Kapor is we have dollars that we invest and we're expecting venture capital returns. We have other dollars that we're fine like you. We can have a 3x or 4x return. And what we want to really get the message out to a lot of entrepreneurs is VC funding is not the North Star for everyone. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have a beautiful small business that benefits your community. And how do we open up capital flows that are not pressing entrepreneurs in ways that are also unhealthy for them?
Right. I mean, and values alignment is incredibly important. I mean, as we said earlier in our earlier comments, there's a lot of capital looking for a home, but it has to be right aligned for your business. Your values have to be shared. Otherwise, that journey that you go, that growth journey together, becomes very difficult along the way if you're not aligned. And we even do this with our exit strategies, where we, at the front end, will structure a responsible exit where the management team or the company can buy our shares back at a fixed price now, not the fixed price then. And so you get this sort of what we call responsible exits out of businesses, which is hard to find. Like, exiting is a tricky bit of business in venture capital. And in our business, at least in the Indigenous side, there are no natural follow-up. We're the only Indigenous venture capital firm in North America. There are no natural follow-ons. So we have to be there to follow and to kind of work with them and mentor the founders when they go to a Series B or a Series C round to bring in the right sort of next stage investors. Otherwise, you're going to undo what you've worked really hard to put into place. It's really hands-on work. It's time-consuming work. It works at a different pace, but it's extremely rewarding at the same time.
I bet you don't hear that very often. Money as healing, take your time, be the size that you need to be and not more and not less. We have a lot of entrepreneurs here in the room, and I'm sure this is not what you usually hear from VCs. So thank you for all of that and the permission to think differently. And Jeff, there's also another novel financing mechanism that you've been working on recently that is around community outcome financing. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that also takes it, we've been talking about the entrepreneur, and now this is about investing in, the community at large coming together to do this work.
Right. So the way, if you think of a theory of change, for example, the way that we looked at it at Raven is we can have impact through these businesses into communities. It's a certain type of impact. But at a community level, it's like the initiative you talked about. You're looking for a different sort of impact, and the problems are often more complex to solve. So we use outcomes-based financing or pay-for-performance financing. We raise upfront capital. Usually it's a government who pays for the performance and the success on it. We're doing a lot of work in clean energy in on-reserve communities and in type 2 diabetes reduction. And type 2 is actually probably more interesting than clean energy because it's so complex and it's such a massive healthcare cost driver. It is fundamentally one of the biggest drivers for bad outcomes during the COVID pandemic. It's bad outcomes on everything. And in Indigenous communities, as in a lot of minority communities, type 2 diabetes is at like 3 to 5 times the normal population. So it's killing our people slowly. So we needed a different mechanism, a different way of looking at it. And so what we do is we dig deep in community and work with them to create the set of interventions. So we're not imposing it. The elders and the youth in community and others are saying, this is what we need because we're closest to the problem and we know how to solve it. And then we go after that and find the money. We don't start with the money. That's the wrong way to start. That's how some of the social finance stuff has started to date, and it hasn't worked that well. So we need the community to own the initiative, own the interventions. We'll find the resources to make it happen. And we call them Indigenous Solutions Lab. You can call them whatever you want, where we kind of lab the ideas together, usually over a 9 to 12-month period, create the interventions that they own, and it's starting to have a lot of success. And we're really excited about where it's going.
I thought you wanted to say something. Because that's also very, the values that we've been talking about is something that you've been, pushing for with Kapor. And there's been a recent report about also the where things are at right now and some of the stories that have come up. Is there something that resonates from what we've been saying about this kind of investment?
Well, there's a couple of things, a couple of thoughts. One is to the entrepreneurs that are in a room, I think that there's an opportunity, right? And we have this entrepreneur in our portfolio. It's called Kai VR. Kai Fraser, and she said, we get to choose who we make rich. And you all have the ideas. I mean, innovation is really the capital that's out there, right? That all investors who want to make a return, we're looking for innovators who have a nuanced view to a broad problem. So just remember, when you're entering these conversations, you're evaluating them just like they're evaluating you, and you get to decide who you want at your cap table. And to your point, it absolutely matters. And it matters most in times like what's happening now. There's a lot of talk around recessions. There is a lot of talk about inflation. And so a lot of startup entrepreneurs are really making hard choices to save capital right now. So they'll be deciding, do we stop hiring? Do we let some of the staff go? And if you're not values aligned, if you don't have values aligned investors at your cap table, they may be pushing you to treat your human capital in a way that doesn't align with your own values. And so what do you do then? And what we've been able to bring to the table as Kapor Capital is that we've been that board seat and that board member who can help hold the line, to remind that entrepreneur what their values were when they started. And because of that, we have had returns. So we're on to our third fund for Kapor Capital 3. In addition to that, we've invested in fund managers. We've had top quartile returns on that. So the big thing that I just want to keep hitting on is that this is just the right thing to do for your business. And really thinking about values alignment. We're seeing, as you said, Jeff, more people who are looking to deploy their capital this way. We're looking at new laws with the SEC, and they're asking companies to report on their human capital. This is the way the world is moving. Those who are not working this way will be left behind. They will not have the returns in the future that we'll see. They'll be seen as extractive, and I think consumers will begin, voting with their own dollars.
Yeah, a couple comments if
Yes,
I could. Yeah, if you're an entrepreneur in the room and you're seeking capital, you're doing as much due diligence on the capital provider as they're doing on you. You want to make sure you know where their money is coming from and what they see as important and how they treated previous entrepreneurs. In fact, I would phone previous founders and say, how was it working with them? We get that a lot. We appreciate that. I think that's a good thing to do. The other thing I would say to entrepreneurs, is that when you're, as a venture capitalist, what I'm seeking, no matter what people tell you, it's character-based investing. You're investing in people. Great ideas are great, but I want to know who the person is behind it. What's the story? What's your story? What motivates you? What makes you move? Because those are, trust me, those are long hours you're about to put into your ventures. And I think, what I want to hear is your story and who you are as a person. That's really what I want to invest in. The other thing, that occurred to me is what more and more investors are seeking is for you to tell your impact story. What's your impact narrative? We are now helping to coach some of the businesses through an impact narrative, which we're fine with. How are you having impact on people's lives? How are you changing it? What's your theory of change behind it? These are really critical things that we now seek as an investor. And I think broadly what you're seeing in the sort of institutional investing and private capital system is a pivot towards, I think pretty soon everyone will be doing impact investing. It's unavoidable. This is the way that it's going. It's like early talks about ESG, which I don't like. I think it's a negative risk screen. What we need is a positive intentionality screen, which is what we seek in business. What's your positive intention? And it just, that's where the fun stuff is too, right? You get to work with people in that way. It's just adding into your thing.
I love what you said about that, and I think as entrepreneurs, really coming up with how you measure that and how you articulate that and how you build a case is really important, because impact can be nebulous, but really doing the work. And I say it's almost like the Wild Wild West now, because like everyone is coming up with their own kind of lens on what impact looks like. And so I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to really think about their theory of change, what impact looks like, really, and dotting line that to like, and what are the dollars saved? What is the impact on the wealth gap? There's things that you can do to also teach investors, because a lot of investors are early in their own journeys around measurement like that. And there's not one set measurement that we can go after. At Kapor Center Investments, which I lead, we came up with the criteria, and we actually did the work and talked about, these are our 5 impact investing criteria. This is how we measure them. This is the evidence that we'd want to see from entrepreneurs. But when I talk to peers in VC, a lot of them haven't done that work as it relates to impact. They have it on returns, but as it means impact on actual human lives, we haven't seen that. So I think that's an opportunity also to show your expertise when you're in front of a funder and really starting to speak their language, but also really being detailed about what that input looks like.
Yeah, 2 comments on that. One, no one pays for impact, so impact measurement. So it's good to build it into your business into the DNA of the business at the beginning, so that you're collecting data as you go along. Data becomes really important in this. We as well created our own Indigenous impact measurement framework based on, we use traditional storytelling, we use traditional mechanisms to do this. And I want to make one more comment on the market. Interesting during the pandemic, because we were running our first fund through it, is what we saw in sort of businesses that were the high impact businesses, is they got non-correlated market returns. So as the market was pivoting in negative directions, these businesses were actually doing really well. They had a sort of certain amount of resiliency in them because they're based deep in their communities. Trust me, we didn't know going into it. We found as we were coming out of it that that's the way that it was. So it was really exciting to see these non-correlated market returns by investing in, and I'm happy to say 60% of our portfolio is women-led. They're all Indigenous, so we're in that space, what we call the impact alpha, where we're getting both diversity and inclusion and all these things happening at the same time with the businesses, which is really, really exciting. But this non-correlated market returns, because of the resiliency, is really important in the long term for fund managers as we're, or as investment funds looking to build out portfolios. The other thing I wanted to say, people think investing in the Indigenous ecosystem, what does that really mean? Our portfolio, it's strangely, as though we are sector agnostic, is primarily tech and tech-enabled and e-commerce enabled, as it turns out. There are some which is high-value products from the land and the sea based on traditional knowledge, moving into other spaces, but we didn't know. We were sector agnostic going in, and that's how it turned out.
That's terrific. So if there's too much to even try to summarize, I think we've given a lot of advice to entrepreneurs in terms of, first of all, you're changing who has the right to fail. There are some people who were born with, failure being this thing to celebrate, and then others who have been just given that right and now are able to go run with it and try things out. And so for entrepreneurs, measuring what matters, doing the due diligence both ways, building the internal capacity to be experts in those things, those are really, really helpful pointers. And for investors, all I have to say is beware, because impact investing is the only investing, sometime down the line, hopefully soon. And also for all of us to be pushing for transparency on those disbursements and those promises that have been made. Anything else that you would like to add in the 2 minutes that we have left?
Yeah, I think just really quickly, we did a report at Kapor on the state of the Black tech ecosystem. And one thing that we think about as other investors is VC investors, 61% of them after George Floyd said that they wanted to deploy more of their dollars into Black, Latinx, and Brown founders, 61%. So the intent is there. And I always believe, maybe I'm Pollyanna, that people do have the best intentions, but we also need to acknowledge as investors what are our blind spots. We do reps and we invest based on pattern recognition, right? And so because of that, you may have a certain type of founder who has a certain type of business that you've invested in, and actually we've been rewarded for that because you've gotten returns. And so I think the challenge for us is to push against that, especially and ask ourselves questions when we're seeing a founder that might not fit that pattern, to take a step back and a pause and ask why. Is it because of their idea? Is it because of their identity? Is it because you don't have familiarity with their community? And I think that that will help us as investors close the gap between our stated outcomes and our intentions and then the reality of where we're deploying the dollars. Because I just think, again, investors are always looking for a good deal. It's these unconscious things that are happening, right, that, again, that have served us really well that won't serve us as we think about moving forward.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment. I don't know if I can add much to it except to say that what I see out there is perceived risk to invest into, BIPOC, the BIPOC community. I'm not in love with the word BIPOC, but it kind of describes what we're talking about here. Most investors are either, afraid, don't understand, and so they put this as perceived risk. And this is for the capital as well as people who do direct investing. And what we found through studies and reports like yours is that it's actually opposite. I know we did a study in Canada and found that the repayment rate on loans for Indigenous people was at like 98.9%, something like that. It was way higher than the mainstream population. So it's just not true. So we're breaking down those barriers about perceived risk on all sides is really important.
Well, Jeff, Angela, thank you so much for all of this insight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'll see you in a little bit after this presentation. Thank you. Thank you.